My name is Tom, and I have been farming the same 100 acres my grandfather bought in 1952. 3 generations of my family worked this land, raised crops, and lived the quiet life that comes with understanding the rhythm of seasons. Our little community of Millbrook was perfect for people like us. Farmers, mechanics, retired folks who wanted space between them and their neighbors. Then the developers came. It started slowly. A few houses here and there, marketed as country living with modern convenience. The new residents seemed nice enough at first. They waved when they drove past my fields, and some even stopped to buy fresh corn and tomatoes from my roadside stand. But everything changed when Karen Morrison moved in. She arrived in late spring, driving a silver Porsche that cost more than I make in 2 years. The house she bought was the biggest in the new development. 4,000 square feet of suburban perfection dropped right into the middle of our farming community like a spaceship from another planet. Karen was not like the other new residents. She came from the city with very clear ideas about how things should look and sound and smell. She had perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes for every occasion, and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. The trouble started during my first hay cutting of the season. I was out at dawn, like always, cutting the back 40 with my old tractor. The morning air was cool and sweet, perfect for the work ahead. But by noon, my phone was ringing. "This is Karen Morrison from Millbrook Heights HOA," she said, her voice sharp and demanding. "I need to discuss the noise situation with you immediately." I wiped the sweat from my forehead and tried to be polite. "What noise situation, ma'am?" "Your machinery has been running since sunrise. Some of us are trying to enjoy our weekend mornings in peace. This kind of industrial noise is completely inappropriate for a residential area." I looked out at my fields, the same fields my family had been working for 70 years. "Ma'am, this is a working farm. I have to cut hay when the weather is right, and that means starting early." "Well, that will have to change. We have property values to consider here. The HOA will be sending you a formal notice about noise ordinances and appropriate hours for outdoor activities." She hung up before I could explain that I was not part of her HOA. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Karen made it her personal mission to document every aspect of my farming operation that offended her suburban sensibilities. She took pictures of my equipment shed, complained about the smell of manure after I fertilized my fields, and started a petition to have my roadside stand removed because it created unsightly traffic congestion. The breaking point came during a particularly hot July evening. I was finishing up the daily chores, feeding my small herd of cattle and checking the irrigation system, when Karen appeared at my fence line. "We need to talk," she announced, not bothering with pleasantries. I walked over, still holding a feed bucket, trying to maintain the neighborly attitude my grandfather had taught me. "This has gone on long enough," she continued, gesturing toward my property with obvious disgust. "The HOA board met last night, and we have decided to give you 30 days to bring your property into compliance with community standards." "Compliance with what standards?" I asked. She pulled out a typed list. "Equipment must be stored in approved outbuildings that match neighborhood architectural guidelines. All fencing must be replaced with approved materials and colors. Agricultural activities that produce odors or excessive noise must be eliminated or moved to approved hours." I stared at her, trying to process what she was demanding. "Ma'am, you are asking me to stop farming. I am asking you to be a responsible neighbor and consider how your activities affect property values for the rest of us. We did not invest in this community to live next to an industrial operation. That night, I sat on my porch looking out at the land my grandfather had cleared by hand, the fields where my father taught me to drive a tractor, the barn where 3 generations of my family had stored their harvest. Karen wanted to turn it all into suburban lawn. But I was not going anywhere. Karen was not bluffing about the 30-day deadline. The very next morning, I found an official-looking notice taped to my front door. Notice of violation was printed in bold red letters across the top. Reading through the document made my blood boil. Karen and her HOA board had listed every aspect of my farming operation as a violation of their community standards. My tractor was too loud. My barn was the wrong color. My fence was not the approved height. Even my cattle were cited as inappropriate livestock for residential zoning. The most insulting part was the section about agricultural odors negatively impacting neighbor enjoyment of outdoor spaces. They wanted me to eliminate the smell of a working farm. I called my lawyer that same day. "Tom, I have some good news and some bad news," he told me after reviewing the notice. "The good news is that your property is protected by agricultural grandfather clauses. You were farming here long before any HOA existed, so they have no legal authority over your operations." What is the bad news? The bad news is that fighting them is going to cost money and time, and they probably know most people cannot afford a long legal battle. They are counting on you giving up. But giving up was not an option. This land represented everything my family had worked for over 3 generations. I was not going to let some entitled city woman drive me away from my birthright. Meanwhile, Karen was busy building her coalition. She organized community meetings at her house, serving wine and expensive cheese while she showed PowerPoint presentations about property values and community standards. She painted me as a stubborn old farmer who was ruining their suburban paradise. To my surprise, several of the newer residents bought into her story completely. They nodded along as she described my morning tractor work as industrial noise pollution and my cattle as unsanitary health hazards. But not everyone was convinced. Bill Henderson, who had lived in Millbrook for 40 years, stopped by my place one evening while I was repairing fence. "Tom, I want you to know that not all of us agree with what Karen is trying to do," he said. "Some of us moved here because we wanted to live in a real community, not some sterile suburb." I appreciate that, Bill, but she seems to have most of the new folks on her side. Maybe so, but she is making enemies too. Did you know she tried to get the Johnsons to remove their vegetable garden because it was not aesthetically pleasing? And she filed a complaint against the Millers for parking their work truck in their own driveway. This was news to me. I had assumed I was Karen's only target. "She is on a power trip," Bill continued, "and power trips do not end well when you push the wrong person too far." As the 30-day deadline approached, Karen escalated her campaign. She started driving by my property multiple times a day, taking pictures and making notes. She filed complaints with the county about my septic system, my well water, and my barn construction permits from 1987. Every complaint was investigated and dismissed, but each one required my time and energy to respond to. I began to understand her strategy. She could not legally force me to comply, but she could make my life so miserable that I would choose to leave. The final straw came on a Saturday morning in late August. I was working in my shop, rebuilding the hydraulic system on my hay baler, when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. Through the window, I saw Karen approaching with two other women I recognized from the HOA meetings. They were carrying clipboards and cameras. "We are here for the official property inspection," Karen announced when I met them at my door. "What property inspection?" As outlined in the compliance notice, the HOA reserves the right to conduct inspections to document ongoing violations. I looked at these three suburban women in their clean clothes and expensive shoes, standing on my porch like they owned the place. "Ma'am, you have no right to inspect my property. You are trespassing." Karen smiled the cold smile I was learning to hate. "Actually, we have every right. The HOA covenants give us inspection authority over all properties in the community." "I never signed any HOA covenants." "Your property is within the community boundaries. That makes you subject to our authority whether you signed anything or not." I stepped back inside and closed the door. Through the window, I watched them walk around my property for the next hour, taking pictures and making notes like they were building a legal case. That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my lawyer and told him to prepare for war. "Tom, are you sure about this? Legal battles with HOAs can drag on for years." "I am sure. My grandfather did not clear this land by hand so some city woman could turn it into a suburban lawn. If she wants a fight, she will get one." But I had no idea how far Karen was willing to go to get what she wanted. September arrived with the kind of perfect weather that makes farmers grateful for their profession. Clear skies, cool mornings, and dry fields meant it was time for the corn harvest. This was always my favorite time of year, when months of careful work finally paid off in bins full of golden grain. But Karen had other plans. The first time I found her Porsche blocking my barn entrance, I assumed it was a mistake. Maybe she was visiting someone and got confused about the property lines. I walked over and knocked on her window. "Excuse me, ma'am, but you are blocking my barn door. I need to get my equipment out." She rolled down the window just enough to speak. "I am not blocking anything. I am parked on a public access road." I looked around in confusion. "Ma'am, this is my driveway. It leads to my barn on my property." According to the county records, this area is designated as community access for emergency vehicles. I have every right to park here. It was complete nonsense, but arguing with Karen was like trying to reason with a brick wall. I went inside and called the sheriff's office. Deputy Martinez arrived an hour later and politely explained to Karen that she was indeed on private property and needed to move her vehicle. She complied with obvious reluctance, shooting me a look that promised this was far from over. The next morning she was back. This time she had parked even closer to the barn door, making it impossible for me to get my harvester out without risking damage to her car. When I approached, she was sitting in the driver's seat talking on her phone, deliberately ignoring me. I tapped on her window. She continued her conversation for several more minutes before finally acknowledging me. "I need you to move your car so I can get my equipment out," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I will move when I am finished with my business here." "What business could you possibly have in my barn driveway?" She held up her phone, showing me she was recording video. "I am documenting the unsafe storage of agricultural equipment in violation of community safety standards. This barn is a fire hazard and an eyesore." The absurdity of the situation was almost funny. Here was a woman who had never worked a day in agriculture, lecturing me about equipment storage while deliberately blocking my access to equipment I needed to harvest crops that were ready to spoil. But it stopped being funny when the weather forecast changed. Rain was coming. Heavy rain that would ruin my corn crop if I could not get it harvested in the next 2 days. In farming, timing is everything. Miss your window, and months of work can be destroyed by forces beyond your control. I tried reasoning with Karen one more time. Ma'am, I have got to get my corn harvested before the storm hits. If you keep blocking my barn, you are going to cost me thousands of dollars in crop loss. She smiled that cold smile I had grown to despise. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to operate an industrial farm in a residential community. Consider this a lesson about being a better neighbor. That was when I realized this was not about property values or community standards. This was about power. Karen had found a way to hurt me economically, and she was enjoying every minute of it. I spent that night researching my legal options. Could I have her car towed? Could I block her in? Could I get a restraining order? Every option seemed to involve lawyers and court dates, and time I did not have. Meanwhile, the weather radar showed the storm system getting stronger and moving faster than originally predicted. I had maybe 36 hours to get my corn out of the field before it would be damaged beyond salvage. The next morning, Karen was back in position, her silver Porsche gleaming in the early sunlight like a taunt. This time, she had brought a lawn chair and a thermos of coffee. She was settling in for a long siege. I walked over to her car, my harvester keys heavy in my pocket. Karen, I am asking you one last time to move your car. I have crops that will be ruined if I cannot harvest them today. She looked up from her phone where she was typing messages to her HOA friends. And I am telling you one last time that I have every right to be here. Maybe this will teach you to think twice before operating heavy machinery that disturbs the peace of our community. I looked at my harvester, a massive green and yellow machine that weighed more than 20,000 pounds. Then I looked at her Porsche, low and sleek and worth more than my annual income. The rain clouds were building on the horizon. My corn was ready. My barn was blocked. And Karen was about to learn that sometimes, when you back a farmer into a corner, he will choose his crops over your car. I climbed into the cab of my harvester, my hands shaking slightly as I turned the key. The massive diesel engine roared to life, filling the morning air with its deep rumble. Through the windshield, I could see Karen still sitting in her lawn chair, sipping coffee like she was at a park picnic, instead of blocking a working farmer's access to his livelihood. She had no idea what was about to happen. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like the storm clouds gathering overhead. This was not just about moving a car. This was about everything Karen represented. The entitled attitude that my family's 3 generations of hard work meant nothing compared to her suburban fantasy. The arrogance that led her to believe she could destroy my harvest just to prove a point. I sat there for a long moment, engine idling, considering my options one final time. I could call the sheriff again, but that would take hours and Karen would probably just move the car to another strategic location. I could try to squeeze past her, but the barn door opening was narrow and any mistake would damage both vehicles. I could give up on the harvest and let the rain ruin months of work. Or I could solve this problem the way farmers have always solved problems, with direct action and practical solutions. Through my side window, I saw Karen stand up from her chair and pull out her phone. She was recording me, probably planning to show everyone how the crazy farmer threatened her with his big scary machine. She was so confident that I would back down, so certain that her suburban rules applied to everyone. She pointed her phone at my harvester and started talking, probably describing the scene for her social media followers. Here was the mean old farmer trying to intimidate poor Karen, who was just exercising her rights as a community member. I put the harvester in gear. The machine lurched forward with the inexorable momentum of 20,000 pounds of steel and determination. I was not moving fast, maybe 2 miles per hour, but when something that heavy starts rolling, it does not stop easily. Karen's expression changed from smug confidence to confusion as she realized I was actually moving toward her car. She stepped closer to her Porsche, as if her physical presence could somehow protect it from the approaching machine. "You would not dare," she shouted over the engine noise. But I was already past the point of daring. This was about necessity now. My corn was ready, the rain was coming, and Karen had chosen to put her car between me and my harvest. The front of my harvester touched the rear bumper of her Porsche with a gentle tap. For just a moment, I paused, giving her one final chance to move the vehicle herself. Instead, she started screaming. "This is destruction of property. This is assault. I am calling the police right now." She fumbled with her phone, trying to dial while also taking video and backing away from her car. But she made no move to get in and drive it out of my path. I pressed the accelerator. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard. Expensive German engineering met American agricultural machinery, and there was no contest. The rear bumper crumpled first, folding under the weight like aluminum foil. Then the trunk collapsed, sending the rear window exploding in a shower of safety glass. Karen's screaming reached a pitch I did not think human voices could achieve. The harvester kept rolling. The rear axle of the Porsche snapped with a sound like a gunshot. Then the passenger compartment began to compress, leather seats and walnut trim disappearing under my front wheels like they had never existed. I steered carefully, making sure to crush the car completely but avoid damaging my barn door or the surrounding driveway. This was precision work, like threading a needle with a 20-ton machine. The engine compartment was last to go. When my harvester finally rolled over the front of the car, there was a moment of resistance as the engine block tried to hold its ground. Then it too surrendered to the inevitable, cracking and splitting like an egg under the relentless pressure. When I finally stopped, Karen's silver Porsche had been transformed into a pancake of twisted metal, broken glass, and automotive fluids spreading across my driveway like abstract art. I climbed down from the cab and surveyed my work. The path to my barn was now completely clear. Karen stood frozen beside her lawn chair, her phone still recording, her mouth open in shock. For the first time since I met her, she was completely speechless. "Ma'am," I said politely, tipping my cap in her direction, "you might want to move that chair. I have got corn to harvest." Then I climbed back into my harvester, drove through what used to be her car, and went to work saving my crop from the approaching storm. Behind me, Karen was screaming something about lawyers and insurance companies and criminal charges, but her voice was lost in the sound of my engine and the satisfaction of a farmer who had finally found a solution to his problem. Sometimes, when people try to destroy your livelihood, you have to show them that yours is bigger than theirs. The sheriff arrived while I was still in the field, combining corn like it was any other harvest day. Through my cab window, I could see Deputy Martinez standing next to the flattened remains of Karen's Porsche, shaking his head in what looked like disbelief. Karen was packing back and forth, gesturing wildly and pointing at me. Even from a distance, I could tell she was demanding immediate arrest, criminal charges, and probably federal intervention. I finished the row I was working on before driving back to face the consequences. "Tom, Deputy Martinez said as I climbed down from the harvester. "We need to talk." "I figured we would," I replied, pulling off my work gloves. Karen rushed over, her face red with rage and exertion. "Arrest him. He deliberately destroyed my car. This is criminal destruction of property." "Ma'am, please step back and let me handle this," the deputy said calmly. He had dealt with Karen's complaints before and knew her tendency to escalate every situation. "Tom, tell me what happened here." I pointed to the crushed car, then to my barn, then to the field where my corn was still waiting to be harvested. "Deputy, she parked her car blocking my barn access during harvest time. I asked her multiple times to move it. She refused. I had crops that would be ruined by the storm, so I moved it myself." "He ran over my car with that monster machine," Karen shrieked. "That is not moving it, that is destroying it." Deputy Martinez walked around the flattened Porsche, taking pictures and making notes. "Karen, why were you parked here?" "I have every right to park on community access roads. I was documenting safety violations in his equipment storage." "This is not a community access road, ma'am. This is Tom's private driveway on his private property. You were trespassing." I could see Karen's confidence wavering as the legal reality hit her, but she rallied quickly. "That does not give him the right to deliberately destroy my property. I want him arrested right now." "Ma'am, I understand you are upset, but the situation is more complicated than that. Tom, did you warn her that you were going to drive forward?" "I gave her every opportunity to move the car herself. I even waited after I made contact, giving her a chance to get in and drive away. She chose to stand there and scream instead." Deputy Martinez nodded and made more notes. "Karen, I need to ask you something important. Does your insurance cover your vehicle when it is parked on someone else's private property without permission?" The question hit Karen like a physical blow. I could see her mind racing as she realized the implications. That does not matter. He still destroyed my car." "Actually, it matters quite a bit for your insurance claim. Most policies have exclusions for vehicles involved in trespassing or illegal parking." While Karen processed this unwelcome news, my phone started ringing. Word was spreading through the community faster than I had expected. "Tom, is it true you ran over Karen Morrison's Porsche with your harvester?" It was Bill Henderson, and I could hear excitement in his voice. "She was blocking my barn during harvest. I had to move her car to get to my corn." "Son of a gun, I wish I had been there to see it." Similar calls kept coming throughout the afternoon. Some neighbors were shocked, some were supportive, and a few were quietly celebrating that someone had finally stood up to Karen's bullying. But Karen was not finished. By evening, she had called her insurance company, her lawyer, and apparently every news outlet within 50 miles. She was determined to make this the biggest story since the county fair scandal of 2019. Her insurance agent delivered the bad news first. Comprehensive coverage did not extend to vehicles deliberately parked on private property against the owner's wishes. Karen would have to pursue compensation through her own liability coverage or file a civil lawsuit against me. Her lawyer was even more discouraging. Property rights in agricultural areas strongly favored farmers, especially when someone was interfering with time-sensitive operations like harvest. A civil case was possible but expensive and uncertain. That night, as I sat on my porch looking out at my partially harvested field, I realized this was far from over. Karen had built her entire reputation in the community on being in control, on making other people bend to her will. Having her car crushed in front of neighbors while she stood helpless was not something her ego could survive. She would find a way to escalate this conflict, even if it cost her more than she could afford. The war between us had just begun. Karen's campaign of revenge began within hours of her Porsche becoming scrap metal. She called an emergency HOA meeting for the next evening, demanding that the board take immediate action against what she called dangerous and criminal behavior that threatens our entire community. But something had changed in Millbrook Heights. Word of the Porsche incident had spread through the community like wildfire, and people were talking, not just about what I had done, but about what had led up to it. Mary Johnson stopped by my place the morning after the meeting. "Tom, I wanted to thank you for what you did yesterday," she said, standing at my back door with a fresh apple pie. "Thank me. I thought most folks would think I went too far." "Maybe some do, but not everyone. Karen tried to get us to sign a petition demanding your arrest, but only half the people would do it. The rest of us started sharing our own Karen stories." She sat down at my kitchen table, accepting the coffee I offered. "Did you know she tried to fine the Hendersons for letting their grandchildren play in their own yard? Said the noise violated quiet hours. And she filed a complaint against the Millers for having a work truck in their driveway because it did not match the community aesthetic standards." This was news to me. I had assumed Karen focused her harassment on my farming operation because it was different from suburban life. But apparently, she was an equal opportunity bully. "The Peterson family is talking about moving," Mary continued. "Karen demanded they remove their vegetable garden because it was not professionally landscaped. When they refused, she started measuring their property lines and claiming their tomato plants were encroaching on common areas." Over the next few days, more neighbors stopped by to share their experiences with Karen's reign of terror. She had appointed herself the unofficial enforcer of subdivision perfection, filing complaints about everything from mailbox colors to lawn mowing patterns. But the most damaging revelation came from an unexpected source. Janet Riley, Karen's closest ally on the HOA board, knocked on my door on Thursday evening. She looked nervous and kept glancing around like she was afraid of being seen. "Tom, I need to tell you something," she said, wringing her hands, "about the emergency meeting Karen called." "What about it?" "She lied about having board approval for her actions. We never authorized her to harass you about your farming operation. When she said the HOA was taking action, she was making it up." This was bigger than I had realized. If Karen had been acting without official authority, then every violation notice, every inspection threat, every legal demand had been fraudulent. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because what she did to you was wrong and what you did to her car. Well, maybe she had it coming, but also because she is planning something bigger. She is talking about having you arrested for assault, claiming you threatened her life by driving toward her." The next day, I received a call from my lawyer with more good news. "Tom, I have been doing some research on your HOA situation. It turns out Karen Morrison was never legally elected as president. The subdivision bylaws require a minimum quorum for board elections, and they have never had enough participating homeowners to meet that threshold." "What does that mean?" "It means she has been operating without legitimate authority this whole time. Every action she took against you was legally meaningless." But the best news came from an unexpected source. Karen's own insurance company was investigating her claim, and they had discovered something interesting. Her policy included a clause excluding coverage for vehicles used in the commission of harassment or stalking. Deliberately parking her car to block someone's business operations, especially after being asked repeatedly to move, qualified as harassment under state law. Not only would they not pay for her car, but they were considering dropping her coverage entirely. Karen's response to these setbacks was predictable. She doubled down. She hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on my farming operation. She filed complaints with every government agency she could find, hoping someone would find a violation she could exploit. She even contacted the local newspaper, trying to spin the story as an attack on property values and community safety. But the tide of public opinion had turned against her. When the newspaper interviewed neighbors about the incident, most of them supported my actions. The reporter seemed more interested in Karen's pattern of harassment than in portraying me as a dangerous farmer. The final blow came when 3 more neighbors approached the HOA board, demanding Karen's removal from any leadership position. They had documented her unauthorized actions and were threatening their own lawsuit if she continued harassing residents without proper authority. Karen's empire of suburban control was crumbling, and everyone in Millbrook Heights could see it happening. But I knew her well enough by now to realize that cornering Karen Morrison was dangerous. Desperate people do desperate things, and she still had enough money and connections to cause serious trouble. The war was not over yet. The end came faster than I expected, but not in the way anyone could have predicted. 2 weeks after the Porsche incident, I received a certified letter from Karen's attorney demanding $50,000 in damages for her destroyed vehicle, plus additional compensation for emotional distress and damage to reputation. If I did not pay within 30 days, they would file a civil lawsuit seeking twice that amount. I handed the letter to my lawyer and prepared for a long legal battle. But Karen had made a critical mistake. In her fury to punish me, she had filed so many complaints with so many different agencies that investigators started comparing notes. They discovered a pattern of false reports, exaggerated claims, and misrepresentation of her authority as HOA president. The county prosecutor was not amused. Filing false reports with government agencies is a crime, especially when done repeatedly and maliciously. Karen found herself facing 3 misdemeanor charges and the possibility of having to reimburse the county for the cost of investigating her bogus complaints. Her lawyer quietly withdrew the lawsuit threat. But the real justice came from the community itself. The HOA board held a special election to remove Karen from her self-appointed position. For the first time in the subdivision's history, they had enough residents participate to meet the legal requirements for a valid vote. Karen lost by a margin of 47-3. The new board immediately rescinded every violation notice and harassment letter she had issued without proper authorization. They also formally apologized to all residents who had been targeted by her unauthorized enforcement actions. Karen's response was to put her house on the market. I heard about it from Bill Henderson, who could barely contain his glee as he delivered the news. She is asking way more than the house is worth and blaming you for damaging property values, he told me. Says no one will want to live in a community where farmers can destroy cars with impunity. Is she getting any offers? Not at her price. Word has gotten out about her behavior, and people do not want to deal with that kind of neighbor. Plus, most folks around here actually like having a working farm in the area. Makes it feel more authentic. The final settlement came 6 months later. Karen's insurance company had denied her claim completely, citing the harassment exclusion in her policy. Her own lawyer advised her that pursuing a civil case would likely result in my countersuit for harassment and interference with business operations, which I would probably win. In the end, she agreed to drop all legal action in exchange for my promise not to pursue damages for the time and money her harassment had cost me. I used the money I saved on legal fees to build a new equipment shed and upgrade my irrigation system. Both improvements were visible from Karen's former house, a daily reminder to whoever eventually bought it that this was still a working farm. Karen moved to a gated community in Florida, where I assume she found new victims for her need to control other people's lives. The family that bought her house turned out to be wonderful neighbors who actually appreciated having a farm next door. Their kids love helping with harvest season, and they buy all their sweet corn and tomatoes from my roadside stand. But the most satisfying moment came the following spring. I was planting corn in the field closest to the road when a silver car pulled into my driveway. For just a second, my blood pressure spiked as I remembered Karen and her Porsche. But this was different. A young couple with two small children climbed out of their sedan and walked over to where I was working. "Excuse me, sir," the man said. "We just moved into the old Morrison place. Our kids were wondering if they could watch you plant." I shut off my tractor and climbed down to meet my new neighbors. "Welcome to Millbrook," I said, extending my hand. "I am Tom." "I am Mike, and this is my wife, Sarah. We heard about what happened with the previous owner. Just wanted you to know that we moved here because we wanted to live in a real community, not some artificial suburb." That evening, as I watched Mike's kids chase fireflies in their yard while their parents sat on the porch drinking iced tea, I realized Karen had done me an unintended favor. Her war against my way of life had brought the community together in defense of what made Millbrook special. Her attempts to impose suburban conformity had actually strengthened our agricultural heritage. Sometimes, when bullies push too hard, they end up creating the very thing they were trying to destroy. My corn grew tall that summer, my harvest was bountiful, and the sound of children playing next door reminded me why my grandfather had chosen this land in the first place. Some things are worth fighting for, even if it means crushing a Porsche to protect them.